we should always end our messages with some sort of hope or some sort of going forward. Going forward, this is what I suggest.
Hello there, and welcome to today's episode of the Easy EdTech Podcast. My name is Monica Burns, and I am so glad that you're here to join me today. If you want to make the most of education technology, aka EdTech, well, you are in the right place. My goal has always been to help make EdTech easier and give you ideas you can try yourself, share with a colleague, or bookmark for later in the school year. Every Tuesday here on the Easy EdTech Podcast, you'll hear stories from my time in the classroom, the work I do now with schools and districts, and my travels to different EdTech events. Get ready for solo episodes where I share some quick tips and stories, and interviews full of practical ideas and stories from new guests each month. If we mention something you'd like to check out, make sure to click the link. You'll find it in the episode description or the summary area where you're listening to this podcast, or you can find every episode and all of the resources we mention by going to classtechtips.com/podcast, or by going to classtechtips.com and just clicking on the Easy EdTech Podcast button at the top of the page. This episode is sponsored by my quick reference guide using AI chatbots to enhance planning and instruction, published by ASCD and ISTE. It's full of quick tips educators can use, and Amazon almost always has it on sale. Just search for me, Monica Burns, on Amazon to see all of my books and quick reference guides. But please remember that there are 2 authors named Monica Burns on Amazon, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to tell the difference between our books. Just head to Amazon, search Monica Burns, and you'll find my quick reference guide using AI chatbots to enhance planning and instruction. This week's episode is titled Tips for Emailing Families with Crystal Frommert, and you are going to love the quick strategies and big ideas Crystal shares in today's episode. I read an article that Crystal wrote for Edutopia and invited her to join me for today's episode to unpack a topic that connects to something we do every day, which is send emails. Let's dive into the conversation. Welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to chat about this topic. That's a big one, part of our everyday lives, which is email, right, and digital communication. So as we jump into this topic today, Crystal, can you share a bit about your role in education? What does your day-to-day look like?
Yes, thank you so much for having me on the show today. I'm glad to talk about this topic. So I am a middle school and upper school, also known as high school, math teacher. This is my 20-something year in education. And in those 20 plus years, I've been an administrator, I've been an instructional coach, I've worked in many roles, but the majority of those years I have been a math teacher. And I also am the author of the book, When Calling Parents Isn't Your Calling, A Teacher's Guide to Communicating with Parents. And that is written for educators to effectively communicate with caregivers and parents on student progress, student behavior, and keeping those lines of communication open.
And that's what I want to talk to you about today, right? It's a topic that we might not give as much thought to in terms of strategy or intention or planning. Sometimes our inbox just feels like something we need to get through, right? And we might write a message a little quickly, or things might get kind of lost, right, as we're trying to communicate an idea. And so today we're talking about tips for emailing families and best practices for maintaining some smooth communication. And why is effective email communication with families so important?
Well, I think that in my years of teaching, it's not something we talk about very often. And in fact, when I became a teacher in the early 2000s, it was actually in the year 2000, email didn't really exist. I mean, it did exist, but it wasn't prolific in education quite yet, or maybe in rural Texas where I was teaching at the time, it just was not all that common to email families. And so a lot of my communication in the early years was face-to-face and also by phone call as well. So maybe I'm a little bit old school in that way, but I think that when you are talking to a caregiver or a family member about the most important thing in their life, which is their child, and you might be talking about something that's sensitive or difficult to talk about, I do believe that face-to-face and phone call is the best option over email. But however, email is practical, it is quick, and we use it all the time, all day, every day. So we're not going to avoid email. And I know that many of the listeners right now are probably rolling their eyes thinking, no way do I want to pick up the phone. No way do I prefer a face-to-face. I know that. And I am the same. I don't want to pick up the phone. I don't want to schedule a face-to-face. But we have to know that there are times when you need to do that. But there are appropriate times to email. And I've written an Edutopia article about this where I've structured it in green light, yellow light, red light of when it's appropriate to send an email. And in the article, I talk about the times that it's completely fine to go ahead and send an email. And an email might be something that's a happy note, something that's positive, a quick question, nothing that's difficult or sensitive, right? And then they go into yellow lights when you really need to think about, is this something that I want to send by email? Is this a conversation that could go in the wrong direction if it's all completely by email? Or is this something that really does need to be in writing? And maybe I need to copy an administrator. So the yellow light is like pause. Let's slow down and pause and let's think this through. And then I think the red light is pretty clear. Do not send an email if it's something that's highly sensitive, something that is upsetting, something that, I mean, obviously if someone, this is so obvious, but if a child breaks their arm on the playground, right, that's not an email. That's a phone call. That's urgent. Right. Or if you've got some mental health issues going on, or you have a severe discipline issue, that is a phone call or face-to-face. However, I do avoid the cold call unless it is obviously an emergency that needs to be a direct phone call. But I'm a big fan of the pre-email where I will ask a caregiver or family member, do you have time today between 2 and 3 p.m., whatever works with my schedule? Again, if this is not urgent, do you have time today between these hours that I could give you a call? And then I state very briefly what it's about. Yeah. And I think that I'm a parent myself. And I think that pre-email or that setting the stage for the call is helpful because you're in the driver's seat of when the phone call is going to happen. We're not going to play phone tag. And also the parents have a heads up of what are we going to talk about in this phone call.
I love that framing of the green light, yellow light, red light, because I think it can help someone like categorize what type of communication they're having, like think about what needs to be in a pause kind of category, right? Where they need to think a little bit strategically on when or how or if, right, they're going to send that message. And I love that pre-email because, you know, for anyone who's gotten a phone call at a weird time from someone they didn't expect it from, right, it can be very jarring and maybe not safe either. Like maybe I'm driving and I feel like I need to take this call, or maybe this happens, right? And so I like that idea that it also gives someone a chance to have a sense of what that conversation might be about. So they're not automatically defensive when that's not really what this is about, right? Or they're not coming into it making other assumptions because they didn't have a chance to think for a second, you know, about, oh, this is about this actually. It's not about what I may be projecting, right? Or what I, you know, wanted to talk about today too, right? So I like that idea of really setting up that phone call for success. And, you know, do you have a structure for someone who, you know, maybe is responding to a lot of emails or has to write a lot of emails, right? A format that can make things really clear, you know, and concise for that family audience, right? Is there a template you suggest teachers or school administrators use just to make sure things are smooth in their email communication?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And I deal with this on a daily basis, right? I do go through the red light, green light thought process, decision making almost on a daily basis when I'm like, do I reply? How do I handle this? But I would think a general rule of thumb is to write with hope. And I'll elaborate on that, that we should always end our messages with some sort of hope or some sort of going forward. Going forward, this is what I suggest that Monica does to improve on the next quiz or something like that. You're giving the family some hope, a next step. We're looking for the positive. We're looking forward into the future. That's how I always try to end any communication that I have with families. Also, I think less is more. Keep the emails short. If you have got multiple paragraphs in an email, that probably should have been a phone conversation, right? Like it can get just too much tone, can be misinterpreted. So less is more, especially in an email. Also, another strategy that I have is after these phone calls or the face-to-face, I do like to follow up with a brief email.
Yeah.
And that gives me a chance to summarize, this is what we talked about. This is what we're going to do going forward. And I can copy the appropriate person in this email for documentation purposes. And that's up to the teacher of, is that a blind copy? Is that a carbon copy? Right? So I think that the follow-up email is extremely important in finalizing and summarizing, this was what was discussed. And we live in a litigious world where putting our conversations in writing is really important. So I've had pushback, and rightly so, from educators who say, well, oh no, I don't want to have a phone conversation because I want everything in writing. Yes, I think we can do both. I think it's yes and. We can have that phone conversation, but we can also follow up. One sneaky trick I have for following up with an email is I will quietly type notes in an email draft while I'm talking to the family. And I say quietly, I don't want them to hear me typing.
Right. Yeah.
And I will write bullet points of this is what we're talking about. And then I will schedule send that follow up maybe the next day because it's fresh. It's a way that I can do two things at once. And I'm writing that draft of what we're talking about and just formulating that draft while we're in conversation so I don't have to do it later.
I love that strategy because you're right. It addresses some pretty valid concerns, right, that teachers might have about wanting something in writing, wanting to maintain a relationship with someone by having that phone call, and just having that follow-up that you can draft kind of in the moment while it's fresh. Then you're not doing that extra mental lift the next day or 2 hours later to say, wait, did we? I'm pretty sure, or I'm not, right? Like you're not having any of those gaps. It's done, right? And then it is something that you can kind of stamp on. And if that person maybe disagrees with how you categorize the meeting, right, they have that opportunity to do so right then. So it's not that, you both left a phone call thinking two different things, right? It's okay, this is our reminder. If we're not on the same page, we're going to get right kind of on the same page based on that email. So that's such a great strategy to have. I like that reminder that if something is feeling really lengthy, right, it should probably be a phone call or in the first place, and ending on that kind of positive note or that hopeful message. And I can almost imagine, I have a lot of digital sticky notes on my desktop, right? So it might be that like almost like email checklist as you're getting into the zone, like, is this short? Like, is this hopeful, right? Did this like have an action item, whatever it means for someone who's listening today, right? To put these ideas into action. And so, speaking of long emails or next steps or suggestions, right? How can teachers balance being informative while avoiding overwhelming families with too much information? I know I've been in situations where, like, if it's not in the first two sentences of that email, I'm like, oh, I'll go back to it later. And then I maybe don't, right? Or I don't get back to it as quickly because I think I already read that email, but I didn't really get all that info. So, where is that line? What could you recommend for a teacher to balance that informative without being overwhelming?
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm a parent myself, and I can't tell you, I'm sorry to admit this, but I can't tell you how many times I've hit delete from an email that came from the school because I just don't have time to read it. It was just too much. I feel bad saying that. I'm sorry to her school, but I have. There's just too much information. I worked at a school in previous years who had a communications coordinator or director of communications. I forget her title. She was fantastic about scheduling when emails go out en masse to families. And every email that came from it, I was an administrator at that school, and every email that came from an administrator went through her office, which I know administrators might think, oh, I don't want someone controlling when my emails go out. But she strategically decided, okay, emails about fundraising go out on Tuesdays, or emails about events go out on Fridays. And she had this communications plan. And I know not every school has a director of communications. That was a luxury that we had, of course, and she was fantastic at her job. But we can think strategically like that. Yeah. We can think, especially if you're an administrator and you're sending out emails that are maybe asking for money or asking to go to an event. Think about how often are you sending those out? Are you inundating the parents' email inbox with requests? Because that can get very tiring, right? And prompt parents to hit delete. So think about strategically when those are going out. And if you're a teacher, I really recommend that you listen to the podcast. Jennifer Gonzalez has a podcast that's really popular called Cult of Pedagogy. Yeah. You can also find this article online too, if you Google it. And it's called Why Is No One Reading My Classroom Newsletter? And there are great tips on how to make your classroom newsletter. And I've written based off this article too, of how to make it more appealing to families that they want to read it. And one takeaway I have from that I've gotten not just from this podcast, but also from other educators' tips that I've learned, is if you give parents a takeaway, an action item that they can ask their child, I think parents really value that. For example, because I have a teenager, if I say, how was school today? All I'm going to get is, fine, I guess. That's all I get from my teenager. And I think that's pretty typical for a lot of tweens and teens. But if you can ask, or if you can tell parents, ask this question today when you pick up your child, or this evening at dinner, tell me about what you learned about sea turtles today. Then you are showing your child, I know a little bit about what you did at school today, and you might spark that interest of the kid will say, oh, well, I learned that sea turtles, they did it, whatever they're going to say, something that's relatable to what they learned at school. It's very specific to them. And I think that's just a tiny little thing that if you put that at the end of your newsletter or end of your email, I think parents might read it to the end.
I love that strategy for, when you think about the cadence, right? If you're sending a weekly newsletter or a monthly newsletter, you want people to read it. And if there's that same sort of like, every time I send, I include that, right? I include that thing that you can do with this information. Like you're going to be incentivized to open it. You're going to see all the other things, right, that are there as reminders. So I think that's such a great piece of advice for someone who's maybe feeling that way, in this wintry time, right? That, okay, we're halfway-ish through the year. How can I re-engage people, right? Or how can I refresh my newsletter? And maybe it's something, something like that. So, email, of course, is a techie thing, right? We're accessing it on all of our devices. Are there any specific tech tools you recommend for streamlining email communication with families?
Yeah, thank you for asking that. And I mentioned it before, but I think it deserves another mention about Schedule Send. I'm a big fan of Schedule Send. Gmail has it, Outlook has it. It is a way that you could type an email and then schedule to send it the next day or any time that you would like. Because if you are the type of teacher who works odd hours, maybe you are like, I'm going to check my email at 11 at night. I'm a night owl. That's not me, but that might work for some. You may not want to send that to families at 11 p.m. So I really am a big fan of Schedule Send. It takes half a second to send something. And also, if you want to look impressive to an administrator and look like you're on your email at 6:30 a.m. if you want to, you can schedule send something at 6:30 in the morning. I might have done that before. And another thing that I like to do is snooze. Yeah. And that helps. I'm one of those people who likes to have a zero inbox. And because my inbox serves somewhat as my to-do list of things I need to look into and do. So if something is not pertinent for the time or the day, I will snooze. Yeah. And you can click snooze and you can choose a future date. And I find that to be really helpful because I am forgetful. And if I do need to write a parent back, but it's not urgent, I will snooze it and it gently reminds me in my inbox, hey, Crystal, you need to respond to this. So those are really small tools, but they have a huge impact on your workflow.
No, and I'm so glad you mentioned the schedule send. This is part of my everyday routine also. And I think it's great for making sure, people are getting things within business hours. And it also reminds them that you might, answer that email at 11 p.m., but doesn't mean they should expect a response, at 11 p.m. either. I know that I try to stay offline on the weekends as if I can, but by the nature of my work, sometimes I'm flying on a Sunday, to go work with a school on a Monday. So Sunday becomes more of a work day for me, and maybe Wednesday that week will be a little slower. But just because I'm working on a Sunday, doesn't mean I want to fill up someone else's inbox, on a Sunday, or pressure them, or make them feel like they have to respond. And so I often will schedule things for 7, 8 a.m., on the Monday morning, even if I answered it, on a Sunday, And so I really love that you chose that as one of your pieces. I love the snooze too, Because it is something that helps us feel like we're setting up everyone for success, that we can dive in at a time that's just right for us, for answering an email without making it appear a little off in terms of schedule, or shifting someone's expectations for communication. I think it's really important for people to know, I might email now, but I know I'm not going to get a response till tomorrow morning, even if it's subconscious, like built that behavior for them. So
I'll also add, if it's okay to add, I've also used generative AI to help me write emails. And I normally don't, because the emails are short. However, if I'm really stuck with how do I word this in a way that I'm just having writer's block for some reason, I have no shame in using generative AI to help me get stuck out of writer's block.
That's a great tip. And I know, in a lot of workshops I've done this year around leveraging AI, in instructional practices, this bucket or category of communication is a really popular one. One, it's a great way to remind people, let's not put sensitive and private information into a chatbot, But when we are stuck, we want to make sure our tone is feeling good. We don't have someone next to us in our office or down the hall to say, can you peek at this first before I hit send, Or anything. I know sometimes I joke, maybe I overdid it with the exclamation points, or maybe I should add some emojis here, and a chatbot could help me do that too. So yeah, such a great reminder that there are an increasing amount of tools, that we can use just to make sure things are clear. So I love that. For someone who's listening today, and maybe just one piece of advice for a teacher who's like, this is on my 2025 list, this is something I'm going to try and strengthen in terms of my skill set, what's one thing they can focus on to improve their communication with families?
Thank you for asking that. I think one thing that is makes such a huge impact on your connection with your students, a connection with families, is sending positive emails. We get so busy that we forget to do that. So one tip that I have, because again, I'm a forgetful person. So one tip that I have is I will put a little dot in my roster. I have a printed roster, and I will put a little dot next to a student's name whenever I've sent what I call a happy email. They can be so incredibly short, 3 sentences. And I even write at the beginning of the email, I'm sending you a short message so that it doesn't seem curt. I'm just letting them know this is sending you a short note to let you know that Monica did a problem at the board today. She did such a great job. I'm really proud of her work in math, period. That's it. And just that couple of sentences can make a kid's day, make a kid's year.
Yeah.
I will tell a quick little story about that. I was telling a student, an 8th grader, I said, because she was struggling, but she happened to do really well with doing a problem on the board. And I said, I'm going to send a happy note to your family just to let them know you did such a great job today and you're really progressing well. And she said, oh, when you send that email, would you mind writing at the bottom, go get her ice cream after school? And And I said, yes, I will. And so I wrote, she's requested to have ice cream after school. I just want to let you know. And the mom wrote back and said, absolutely, she's deserved that ice cream. We're going to get some ice cream.
Oh
so
my
just
gosh.
made it a little fun
Yeah.
exchange and just made that kid's whole weekend because she got ice cream and she got the praise from her family.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. And right. And you can imagine, right, those scenarios where that little extra beat, right, of sending that email can make a massive difference, right, in terms of classroom community too. So, Crystal, I'm going to link out to your book, to that Edutopia article, to extra resources, of course, from our conversation today. But for someone who's, on the go, maybe just listening in and making that mental bookmark, where can people connect with you? Where can they learn more about your work?
Yeah, great. So LinkedIn, pretty active on LinkedIn. My book, When Calling Parents Isn't Your Calling, is on Amazon. So check that out. And I also have a website called crystalfrommert.com. It's also linked via my LinkedIn, which might be easier to find me there.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
It was lots of fun chatting with Crystal today. Let's finish up with a few key points to make this EdTech easy. Use the green, yellow, and red light system to decide when email is appropriate for communication. Always end emails with a positive, hopeful message or next step. Short emails are better. Lengthy messages should be a phone call instead. Follow up your calls or meetings with a brief email summary for clarity and documentation. Remember, you can find the show notes and the full list of resources from this episode, including all of the ways to connect with Crystal, by going to classtechtips.com/podcast and finding today's episode number 305. This episode is sponsored by my quick reference guide using AI chatbots to enhance planning and instruction, published by ASCD and ISTE. It's full of quick tips educators can use, and Amazon almost always has it on sale. Just search for me, Monica Burns, on Amazon to see all of my books and quick reference guides. But please remember that there are 2 authors named Monica Burns on Amazon, and I'm pretty sure you'll be able to tell the difference between our books. Just head to Amazon, search Monica Burns, and you'll find my quick reference guide using AI chatbots to enhance planning and instruction. Thank you for listening to this new episode of the Easy EdTech podcast. I love creating new episodes for you each week, but I could use a bit of help spreading the word about the podcast. Can you leave a rating or review on your favorite podcast app? Spotify will let you tap on the stars, and Apple Podcasts will let you tap on the stars and leave a 1 or 2 sentence review. Thank you so much for taking this extra step. It helps other educators find episodes like this one when they're searching for EdTech tips.